Tanutamani, a successor of Taharqa, came to the throne and also moved into Egypt to get control over the Nile Delta.
Tanutamani was the nephew of Taharqa. His succession to throne is documented in a dream stela that was found with Pia's victory stela at Gebel Barkal in 1862, currently is housed in the Nubian Museum in Aswan. He is buried in the necropolis at Nuri in Tomb 16. Tanutamani was the last ruler of the 25th dynasty. In the narrative of his stela, the king is referred to as Lord of Valor like Montu, great of strength like a fierce-eyed lion. It goes on to explain that in the first year of his reign, Tanutamani had a dream of two serpents, one on his right hand and one on his left. After waking, the king's advisors interpreted the dream, saying that the southland is already thin, seize the northland. His interpretation was that he should bring Egypt back under the control of the Kushite Empire. Historians also assume that at the time of his accession, Tanutamani was inside Egypt proper. The text on the stela states, "He went from where he was to Napata, Nubia, and there was none who stood up to oppose him." This indicates that he went to the temple of Amun and was acknowledged as god and king. Other texts within the stela confirms that he was at this time in control of southern or upper Egypt, but at the very least was not in control of parts of the north. After ascending the throne, he went north from Nubia, first stopping at Elephantine, where he participated in a festival procession of the god Khnum. From there, he sailed further north to Waset, Thebes, where he once again participated in the festival. Nikau of Sais may have been killed in this battle, but his son, Samtek, who was loyal to the Assyrians, fled to Asia. After this victory, Tanutamani honored the god Ta-Sakor and his wife Shachmet in the great temple of Memphis, and afterwards ordered the building of a chapel dedicated to Amun at Napata in Nubia. Tanutamani apparently spared the lives of the Delta princes, sending them home, but this victory was very short-lived.
The Assyrian army marched back into Egypt, and this time they had reinforcements. They not only reconquered Lower Egypt, which is the northern part of Egypt, but they kept moving, and they conquered Upper Egypt. And in conquering Upper Egypt, by then they are pushing out the dynasty of the 25th dynasty.
So he was the last king to attempt to take back Egypt from the Assyrians. And for a brief time he was successful. And this shows the robust relationship between these Nubian kings and the people of Nubia at that time and Thebes. Because the Thebans could have taken the easy way out and resisted Tanutamani and stayed with their Assyrian allies. But in fact, they felt so strongly against the Assyrians and for the Nubians that they welcomed Tanutamani back in, supported his campaign against Assyria, and paid the price, because after the successful Assyrian campaign defeating Tanutamani, Thebes was sacked for the first time. And this was, of course, a tragic moment in Egyptian history, also in Nubian history.
And that is mentioned in the Bible, the sack of No Ammon, as they referred to Thebes. It really shocked the ancient world because it was such a great capital.
Tanutamani seems to have continued to be acknowledged as pharaoh in Thebes until his 8th year. There are inscriptions that were discovered at the Luxor that date the installation of priests by his name, which would indicate the Kushites still maintained a large official presence in the city. Pia's daughter, Shepenwepet II, succeeded Amenirtis I as God's wife of Amun, with Taharka's daughter, Amenirtis II, as her designated successor. From the beginning of Tanutamani's reign, his cousin remained the high priest of Amun, and there exists other evidence of Kushites' continued power within the region. The Assyrian reconquest effectively ended Nubian control over Egypt, Although Tantanmani's authority was still recognized in Upper Egypt until his 8th year, around 656 BC, when Psamtik I's navy peacefully took control of Thebes and effectively unified all of Egypt. Thereafter, Tantanmani ruled only Nubia. He died in 653 BC and was succeeded by Atlanersa, a son of Taharka.
Essentially what happens is that the Assyrians are able to push the Nubians back into Nubia, and they establish themselves as the next dynasty of Egypt. Of course, Nubia certainly does not die at that moment. There is this interesting transformation that occurs. The capital, over the course of the next several hundred years, is moved from Napata to Merowe. Napata at the 4th cataract, Merowe further south at the 6th cataract. And we have this resurgence of Nubian civilization.
But it's important to remember that the civilization and the dynasty that they had founded lasted and continued to be powerful in the south for another 1,000 years.
The end of this very important dynasty, this very important era in Egyptian history, is uncertain and largely unknown. But we do know that it was a golden age for Egypt because much building was done under the kings, particularly the 3rd king. There was much renovation to Memphis and to Napata and to Thebes and other cities in Egypt. And there was a great golden age of architectural achievement as well as cultural achievement during this important 25th dynasty of Egypt.
It is a turning point for both Egypt and KUSH. KUSH, before the 25th dynasty, it clearly had gotten itself organized, as Kadimala's inscription shows. But it had not congealed into a Northeast African power or a monumental state. The 25th dynasty caused it to actually consolidate itself as a fully organized state of imperial size. And it lasted until about 370 or so AD. So this continued as a imperial-sized state for 1,000 years, which is a very, very long time.
This is a period that has been grossly overlooked, has not been a part of history, because as we all know, history is usually defined and written by conquering groups.
In school, Africa either was never in the textbooks or otherwise it was at the very end and we never got to it. And when I started college, I was really excited about the possibility of really getting into African history, but the problem was I was delighted to be at Harvard, but there was no study of Africa. There was no study of African American history.
I think that this particular story begins to tell that whole concept of who we came from, why we were important, and what contributions were made to civilization.
Well, one of the things about the Nubian dynasty is that it's tended to be overshadowed by Egypt. And that's the case for Nubian history in general. Nubia was first excavated and kind of investigated by Egyptologists. And sadly, because of both colonial attitudes and racist attitudes of the time, they tended to look at Nubia as in the periphery, in the shadow of Egypt, and that attributed any good things that happened in Nubia, any sophisticated things that happened in Nubia, to Egyptians. And that suited their ideas about sort of superior groups of people. At one point, they even tried to say that the Egyptians were from northern parts and not even African at all.
For centuries, literally, European scholars, using no evidence whatsoever, were insisting that the Egyptians had migrated from the Mediterranean.
If you look today at the Cairo Museum, the face of the Cairo Museum, you'll see these great marble plaques that are on the walls, and every single dynasty is mentioned, except the 25th dynasty.
You see, well, political science teaches us in college that no one records the successes of the enemies. So they have to structure the absence of the truth to teach the lie. The only way you can teach the lie is to remove the truth.
I personally believe that through history there was no justice. What I've understood is that the Europeans in their voyages and their archaeological research, and also with Germany, especially with Nazi Germany, exploring Egypt for going into the tombs or going looking for mystical powers in their research then at that time. What I found is that historically they destroyed many of the figure faces of the statues of the images. When they seen an African type of feature of a pharaoh or a queen or officers or warlords of that time, they seemed like they got upset and they downplayed that they were black in origin and they were part of the family of KUSH, of Noah.
Colonization, slavery, manipulation of wars, manipulation of resources, propaganda, misinformation, misinterpretations of Bible passages, systematic theological deceptions, all kinds of things that have happened over the years for the people to be afraid to be critical in their thinking, to be afraid to even hear God. Because for so long, this is what they've told me this has meant, that I feel like I'm a straight sinner if I even question what my pastor said or what my rabbi said.
I believe that this is the time, and this is the season, that the understanding of history, of more truthful, being that through the internet and through, you can Google things and go right on top of pyramids nowadays and go right to streets and research things, that we're realizing that someone tried to wipe history.
And certainly the one civilization that received a stronger legacy from Egypt was not the Middle East, but Nubian civilization in Africa. And it just highlights the fact that Egypt is an African civilization. Its people are an African people that were related to Nubians, that interacted with Nubians, and civilization went side by side and developed with Nubia, with each contributing to the other.
And you understand now that in KUSH, while people imitated Egyptian things in Greece sometimes and in Rome sometimes, they even had a cult of Isis at Pompeii, for example, they never did it coherently. The only place where pharaonic culture was practiced coherently, idiomatically, if you want to call it that, as though it were Egypt itself was KUSH.
We hope that this is just the beginning of a trend of reevaluating what we know and what we're going to emphasize in our holy texts. I owe to my children, my grandchildren, and to the society that I come from, that this information be given a fresh look at.
To me, this is such a rich area for serious research because part of the story is not being told. And I think it's the work of historians and others to try to go back and fill it in so that we have an honest story of what actually happened.
And not knowing this history, to me, is actually a form of malnourishment that all people have. All of us are suffering from a lack of understanding and a lack of knowledge as to who we are and how we developed and evolved. So I feel that for young people, this is a great time and it's a great opportunity to not just understand these things in the context of civilization, but also to understand them from a more holistic standpoint, where that spiritual side is being nourished also. To show that totally diffusing stereotypes of the African continent and African nations, but embellishing on the fact that back in, what did we say, 760 BC, there were benevolent leaders. They weren't just warriors that were running around slaughtering, maiming, raping, and pillaging, but people that were actually ruling over sophisticated societies.
The mixability of these two cultures, which is fundamental to the fact that the 25th dynasty arrived on the scene, is something that needs to be pursued more both in Egyptian studies and in Nubian studies.
So I think that there are times when the Lord allows a certain level of perfection and a certain level of peak performance to write its signature on history. You know, that season can be rewind as a memorial in time. You know, that's what it was supposed to do at that season. That's there as a part of the archives.
Currently, the Sudanese government has, with the assistance of the Germans, the French, and the Chinese, have built a huge dam about 350 miles northwest of Khartoum, the capital of the Sudan. Now, the Sudan is the region in which the artifacts and the holy cities and the temples of the 25th dynasty's empire are largely located. Now, the significance of this project, it's known as the Miro Dam, is that it is going to flood out an entire area that encompasses the sites and most of the locations of these artifacts. We are aware that the Poles, the Italians, and a group of archaeologists from the University of Chicago here in the U.S. were feverishly working on a salvage dig to basically get as many of the artifacts that they could salvage before the dam became operational. It's our understanding that the operation commenced somewhere in late September or early October of 2008. So this area has now been flooded. There are other remnants of Nubian's empire and Nubian civilization that are down or south of this particular dam, and it is our understanding that the Sudanese government is planning another large irrigation project, very similar to the Miro project, in this area, which is around the third cataract of the Nile River. So the importance here is the fact that this is history. This is a base of knowledge of this civilization that's lost forever.
I call upon the French. I call upon the Chinese who have perhaps the longest continuous history of any group of people in the world, that they do more to accelerate the digs and the recovery of information about these people.
But maybe there's a lesson in this, and the lesson is, rather than wait until someone's about to build a dam, we have to pay a great deal more attention to history without all the biases that makes it so difficult for us to simply study Africa.
There was almost no exploration there before the dam was begun. And there was a very intense period of a decade or so where people were working to try and rescue archaeology there. It's not a compensation that the archaeology is now all gone, that we have a great deal to work with right now that we would not have. Of course, a lot was lost, and the ability to go back and check your results is not there. So it does have that negative side to it.
What if young African Americans in the hood, what if they really knew that there were people that maybe had the same kind of skin color that they had, maybe had some kind of historical connection to where they came from, and that these people had developed an extraordinary language. These people developed an art and a form of mathematics, and that what they developed preceded what we in America consider to be what happened when our country was founded. To know that there are people to whom they may have a connection that developed things thousands of years ago that was perhaps equal and superior at the time, put it in historical, than what we have now. So that's very empowering.
Yeah, so one of the exciting things about Nubian archaeology is that, unlike many parts of the world, even to some extent Egypt, we can really change history by what we find, because so little has been known in the recent past about it.
The history that locks so many stories and historical events relating to the Kushites out of our canon, out of the body of knowledge, what it is really doing is reinforcing the attempt to create a slave mentality that began with the transatlantic slave trade. And of course, people today would be horrified if they were in any way associated with trying to do any such thing, but it's not the bad intentions of contemporary society. It's the fact that contemporary society has not dismantled a worldview that was put together with a particular hidden agenda. And the agenda was not so hidden. The agenda was to to rationalize slavery by saying, we are civilizing these people. They do not have a history. This issue of the Kushites is not relevant. It's all just minor, minimal, marginal stuff in order to reinforce a false notion that a particular group, Europeans, had a well-substantiated history and Africans did not. I mean, it just so happens that all human beings have a history, and that's all there is to it.